In the IFSC, there are 3,000 hedge funds, over 3,000 hedge funds. Maybe just explain what a hedge fund is. A hedge fund, you won't be let into a hedge fund, it's a gambling club, right? You need €1 million to get into the hedge fund. You then get 100 similar individuals with €1 million. You've now up to €100 million. Then, to use the buzzwords, the jargon, you then leverage that up and you get about 1,000 million in some cases. You pay the hedge fund manager 2% every year, so 2% of your million goes to the hedge fund manager every year. And when the hedge fund manager scores with a good gamble, good prediction, they get 20% of the takings. Which means that a hedge fund is always looking out for a good gamble. The gambles can be anything. It can be futures markets, prices of food, whatever you want to gamble on, a hedge fund will do it. So in Ireland, the total value of hedge funds before the crash was 1.24 trillion. And that's an amazing figure, located in Ireland. Now, why are they located in Ireland? Okay, the office of a hedge fund may be in Belgravia and so on, but why located in Ireland? The more precise word is administered in Dublin. The hedge fund's administered in Dublin. There's a friend of mine, maybe actually in the audience, who works for one of these administrative companies, right? A company like, for example, State Street International. State Street International is one of the biggest administrators of hedge funds in Dublin and possibly other parts of Europe. Interestingly, it's the head of State Street International is one William Slattery, who, guess what, used to be the regulator who was supposed to regulate the hedge funds. But then he gives up that job and joins the hedge funds, right? This is how it works in Ireland. The reason why so many hedge funds are administered in Ireland is again because of a scam. Irish hedge funds, if you like, the people who work on the computer screens trying to spot where to put the money and so on, are working away in Dublin, often quite hard. The hedge fund is domiciled in the Cayman Islands. So it's a scam used. And what that's about is that these people can pay no tax. They rob the resource of the world, people to work this money, and they're so bloody greedy, they want to pay no tax, so they register in the Cayman Islands. And the Irish state facilitates that operation all the way. Okay, so this country became a basis of speculation in terms of finance. Maybe just illustrate that quite dramatically. There are 13% of Irish workers are producing things, are manufacturing, right? So only 13% of the Irish economy is now based on manufacturing. 14% of the Irish workforce are based in finance. There are more people on computer screens helping global hedge funds than there are making useful things in this country. That is the saddest indictment of what's happened to Irish capitalism. The other elements of speculation you're probably more familiar with, so I'm not spending much time on, which is housing. I'll just highlight one thing. Ireland, you can see the scale of the housing here. But what that has meant today is that there are 250,000 unoccupied houses, second homes, essentially unoccupied buildings in this country. A population, I remind you, of 4.5 million people. There is 250,000 unoccupied dwellings. If you go to a town like Roscommon, for example, or Carrick on Shannon, you'll find block after block of just nobody living in these sort of blocks. Right? That's what this sort of speculation has led to in this country. And when we say they're unoccupied, there are still 50,000 people looking for houses, but they can't afford, if you like, the rent or the prices of these houses. Okay, so this is what happened in terms of Irish capitalism. To put it simply, the Celtic Tiger was a brilliant success story for capitalism in Ireland. It was built originally on a flow of US investment into manufacturing industry, into computers, pharmaceuticals and medical devices. That stopped after 2001. It essentially stopped. That model stopped working. And the government, instead of, if you like, trying to deal with the legacy, put its foot down and went even further into neoliberalism. And this way it went was to reconfigure Ireland as a gigantic centre for speculation, financial services, and also for construction. And that is why this country is now facing the worst economic recession in the world, bar probably Iceland or Latvia. Now, last point to make before we take a break. Okay, so in Ireland, we're getting the most extreme version of what is happening. But it would be wrong to blame Brian Cowan entirely. I think you have to look a bit deeper at how capitalism itself works and why, if you like, the Irish crash coincides with a global crash. Marx pointed out two fundamental problems that capitalism always has. The first problem is a problem of overproduction, right? Capitalism is a system which has nothing to do with fulfilling people's needs. That's entirely accidental. The basis of producing anything is profit. And therefore, logically, and Marx was rigorous in his logic, what that means is that as long as there's profit, there will be a tendency to increase production. In fact, the best capitalist is somebody who makes a huge profit, and then instead of going off and living a life of luxury, they then reinvest most of that profit back into the corporation to make more profit. So, as Marx put it, capitalism is profit, accumulation, profit, more accumulation. Okay, if you're doing that, you do that by trying to keep wages down. And therefore, at a certain point, you end up producing far more than, if you like, people can actually buy. Let me just go on to the next one. If you look at the pattern of most industrial countries, it runs something like this. Let's just take these two lines, this one here and this one, right? In most industrial countries, since the 1960s, wages have flatlined. Wages, essentially, they may rise with inflation, but workers are not getting a bigger share of the economy. In fact, their share of the economy, if anything, is decreasing. At the same time, in almost every industrial country you look at, you'll find productivity keeps on increasing. You know, more and more people talk about stress, working hard, and so on. So you get this pattern in almost every country of wages and productivity. And the gap between the amount produced and the wages is growing more and more. And this leads to the problem of overproduction, right? The second problem that Marx mentions, second problem Marx mentions is a tendency for the rate of profit to fall. I won't go into this in great detail, but just the pattern, you can look at it across in various studies. The rate of profit in manufacturing tends to decline from, say, in the 60s or 50s, around 20% rate of return, down to 5-8% in the present era. Now, how does capitalism get over this problem? And essentially, it flummoxed socialists. In the 90s was a difficult period for socialists in some ways, because, to be frank, we thought the system was going into a greater crisis than it was. But in fact, what we had not predicted was that the system had developed a temporary solution, principally through the emergence of China. Right? China was a gigantic society. Workers paid terribly low wages, but the crucial thing about China is half of the national product of China is taken out of China and reinvested in government bonds or in forms of credit in America. And this allowed for a new solution to work. And what was the solution? Essentially, capitalism shifted to a model of working class debt. Right? In other words, if that gap between wages and productivity, if wages are kept down, one way of overcoming the problem was to encourage people to borrow. Okay? So this is a pattern that developed from the 80s onwards. When I was growing up, for example, if you wanted to borrow, you put on a suit, you talked about your career, you presented yourself as middle class, you know, you're a stable, respectable member of society. These days, anybody can borrow, right? That's the basis of modern capitalism. So it encourages working class debt. And secondly, what it does is it engages in speculation. To use one figure here, in 1960, 15% of the profits of America came from finance and speculation. Just before the recent crash, that had jumped to 41%. 41% of the profits of America come from finance and speculation. What sort of things? This sort of thing. Speculating in stocks and shares. Speculating in the futures market. Currency. There's enormous transaction of currency that goes on every day, but only a tiny percent of it is for trade. Most of it is speculating, right? So this is where the profits of modern capitalism has come from. And therefore, to conclude this section, we live in a world that is out of control. It's just Ireland is a more extreme version of that. We're getting the version concentrated in this tiny country, but it's an extreme version of what's happening generally. And the only conclusion I think we can reach is the system is not working. It's just not working. And when then we come to look at solutions, I think we have to start from that fact there's something fundamentally wrong with the system, rather than trying to find solutions that patch it up and